Welcome back to the fifth module in the School of Global Citizenry's Certificate of Entrepreneurship program. We are discussing managing financial resources, and this video will cover part two, developing financial projections. Now, in the first part, just to recap, we discussed understanding cash flow, at least in a very big picture sense, and some basic steps in creating a budget. Now that you understand cash flow and budget a little better, we're going to think about developing financial projections. How in the world do you go about that in a reasonable, sustainable way that doesn't feel like you're just sort of picking numbers out of the air? And then how can you kind of monitor that over time and even adjust it so that you can be very strategic with your partnerships and relationships over time? So developing financial projections starts with creating a very, very big picture, much bigger than you are ever going to deal with in your particular startup, and then becoming more focused as you proceed through these steps. But the first thing you need to do, and this might sound a little outlandish, but is to identify what we're going to call the total addressable market, or the TAM. For your particular good or service or product. So the total addressable market is literally all the potential customers that your industry has. If you're starting a coffee shop, who are all the people around the world who buy cups of coffee from coffee shops? If you are starting a software company, who are that maybe does software as a service for business or whatever else, who are all of the businesses in the world that buy this kind of software? If you're creating sculptures out of toothpicks, who are all of the potential buyers around the world who buy sculptures made of toothpicks? So the purpose of identifying this total addressable market is to then take the next step here, which is to think about or do some research on the growth rate of that market. If we looked at coffee shops around the world, what is the growth rate of coffee shops globally? And you can make that a little smaller and think about within your country. If you're in the United States, what are some of the trends in growth of, or even sometimes shrinking in the market of coffee shops? Think in terms of your state or your city. So again, we're kind of narrowing the focus. But one of the ways you're going to help develop your own financial projections is placing it within this larger context. You shouldn't expect necessarily as a startup to be experiencing way more growth in your particular target market than the total addressable market is experiencing as a whole. It's unlikely, if you're getting into an industry or selling a good or a service inside of a total addressable market that's shrinking, that you somehow are miraculously going to stumble upon the formula that's going to create incredible growth. Now, you might, but you should do that understanding how that's going to happen within the context of your total addressable market. So start there. What is this industry doing on a grand scale, and what are its trends in terms of cash flow? Is it growing, and by what proportion? Is it shrinking, and by what proportion? That's step one. Once you have identified the total addressable market and its growth rate, the next thing you need to think about is what portion of that total addressable market are you going to serve? Again, if you're starting a coffee shop in Jacksonville, Florida, then what portion of the total addressable market is within Jacksonville, Florida? And within Jacksonville, what area do you think you're going to serve anyway? Do you feel like it's going to be within 20 miles of the coffee shop that you're going to open? Or if you are starting an online store that's selling, graphic T-shirts, what is the potential portion of the TAM that you think you can actually address? Now, that's different than who are you going to target within that specific sector. Okay, so the portion of the market is who could you potentially actually reach? Do you have the capacity to serve X number of people or reach X number of clients per year within this total addressable market? Doesn't mean you're going to. You may not have any intention to reach every potential customer that you can, but what is the portion of the target market that you, or pardon me, the total addressable market that you could actually, in theory, serve in some meaningful capacity. Now, within that portion that you could reach, who's your target? If again, take the coffee shop analogy. If you were starting the coffee shop and your total portion of the TAM was within 30 miles around you, a 30-mile radius, and there's already a handful of coffee shops that are reaching those same people, who do you target? Is it a particular age group? Is it people that have a particular interest? Who within that potential portion that you could serve do you plan on actually serving? What portion of that target market do you think you could actually convert into some form of a lead? People who would become curious about you. Now, that's going to depend largely on what your marketing strategy is. Are you leaning heavily on social media? And how much of your target market uses that form of social media? Are they all on TikTok, but you're using Instagram? Are they on LinkedIn, but you're using Facebook? Are you paying for clicks on internet searches through Google and Bing and Yahoo? Are you doing other forms of advertising, native advertising that's showing up on other web pages, or digital advertising through other sources like online magazines in your area that are reaching your target market? Are you creating TV ads or billboards or whatever else? So that's going to help you figure out how much of your target market you can actually convert to some kind of a lead. And then once you have a lead, what portion of that lead can you convert into customers? Now, part of what your monitoring task is going to be over time, because developing financial progressions is a moving target. You're going to do it once, but then you're going to do it again and again and again and again throughout the life of your business. And some of the dials that you can be turning over time are how can you improve conversion rates from target market to lead, and then from lead to client or customer. So you have two different ways you need to think about those kinds of touches of your potential clients and how that's going to fit into your financial projections. Because how many of your target market you can convert to leads, and how many of your leads you can convert to clients or customers, is going to fit back into that cash flow conversation we talked about earlier, when you're actually thinking about how much revenue you can generate. So we're kind of working backwards into that by thinking about total addressable market, and then getting narrower and narrower in our focus and converting any of those particular, portions to targets, to leads, to customers or clients. Once you've thought about those things, you have a few more questions you need to answer pretty specifically. One of these things is called a churn rate, which sounds kind of strange, but depending on the kind of business that you're starting, you may have repeat clients or customers. Again, in the coffee shop analogy, you're not just selling one cup of coffee to one client and that's it. Hopefully, these are people that who are return customers of yours. But the likelihood is that some of those are going to change over time. You're going to get new customers and lose old customers. So you can't necessarily look at 1 month's numbers and say, well, this number of people bought this many cups of coffee, so I'm going to count on next week or next month those same people coming in to buy the same kind of thing again. That's not usually how people's buying habits work. So while you will retain, in some sectors or some industries, you will retain some recurring customers and clients, you're also going to lose others. So what is that rate of losing and gaining old clients and new clients? What is the average spend per customer? If you're selling donuts, is it on average people only buy one, and for 79 cents, or do they buy a dozen, or do they buy a cup of coffee and a half dozen donuts and a bag of donut holes? And then think about, what does that mean that if I have X number of customers per week or per month, and the average spend is this much, how is that helping me understand what my potential revenue might be for that month, and create a projection around that? Now, if you're doing larger ticket things, right? If you're providing some sort of a professional service that costs $200 an hour, or costs $5,000 or $20,000 for a single event or service, then these numbers change quite a bit. But the question is still the same. Per customer, what is the average spend? And then on average, how many purchases happen in a particular period? If you're creating projections over the course of a month or a quarter, then what's the average spend per customer times how many purchases happen in that period? Are you getting 15 new clients in a month, or 50 over a quarter, or are you having 100 customers a day come through your door and buying a particular average amount of a good or service? So what you're left with is the total purchases times the average purchase amount. This gives you your projected revenue over that particular period of time. And then you take your projected revenue minus your projected expenses. When we talked earlier about cash flow and creating a budget and the ongoing capital expenses, the recurring expenses, the one-time expenses, what are you likely to spend over a particular period? Again, if then maybe that's a month, maybe that is a quarter, maybe that's a year, but your financial projections should be based on that thought process. What is my total addressable market? How am I going to step through that into my target market, conversions into leads, conversions of leads into customers? How many customers do I think I'm going to have over the period I'm trying to make a projection about? What is the average spend of those customers? And then take that amount of purchases times average purchase amount for projected revenue, and then subtract my projected expenses from that revenue to give me some sense of what my expected profit is. And that helps you create a projection, a very reasonable and sustainable projection over a certain amount of time. Now, the reason, as we talked about in part one, that we manage, or we have a way to monitor cash flow is so that we can come back and adjust these projections over time. We always want to have an accurate way to look forward. Based on the last couple of years, what has been my trend? Where am I trying to reduce expenses, increase revenue? Do I need to raise my rates, etc.? And how does that translate into my financial projections? The longer you are in business, the more specific and accurate your projections can become. If you're just getting started, you're not likely to be very accurate, but you should try to be reasonable based on the expectations that you're thinking through. But monitoring your cash flow gives you a way to become more precise over time in your projections, to the point where if you're doing this right and monitoring your numbers, you can pretty easily tell a quarter ahead of time, a year ahead of time, where you're going to be, because you are having more and more specific data to feed into your system. And again, having those projections in place is going to help you with lending, with investors, with overcoming shortfalls, with having a plan for retained earnings, etc. I want to make sure that I remain available to those of you who are using this program and benefiting it somehow. I've got my contact information on this slide here. If you want to shoot me an email at riley.kern@gmail.com with School of Global Citizenry in the subject line, I'm happy to interact with you and answer some questions that you might have. And I hope you found this helpful. Thanks so much.